What if I told you that one man's ideas were so bold, so uncompromising, that they shook the very foundations of religion, politics, and social order? Bertrand Russell wasn't just a philosopher, he was a provocateur, a Nobel Prize-winning thinker who dared to challenge the norms of his time. While freedom of thought may seem like the norm to many of us today, at the beginning of the 20th century, and in many parts of the world even now, it was anything but guaranteed. He spoke out against the institutions of religion, opposed world wars at great personal cost, and questioned the economic systems that dominated society and served the people at the top. These weren't abstract theories, they were calls to action, and they made him one of the most controversial intellectuals of the 20th century. Yet, his ideas remain just as urgent, just as unsettling, and just as relevant today as they were a century ago. So, why were Russell's ideas considered dangerous, and why do they still matter now more than ever? Let's find out. And if you can do me a favor and subscribe and hit the thumbs up button, it would really mean a lot to me, and it would really help this channel. Bertrand Russell was one of the most influential intellectuals of the 20th century. Born in 1872 into an aristocratic British family, Russell was destined for a life of privilege. But rather than conforming to societal expectations, he spent his life challenging them. He became a philosopher, mathematician, logician, historian, social critic, and activist whose work reshaped not only academic disciplines but also public discourse. Russell's contributions to logic and analytic philosophy were groundbreaking. Alongside Alfred North Whitehead, he co-authored Principia Mathematica, a monumental work that sought to ground mathematics in formal logic. This effort laid the foundation for much of modern logic and the philosophy of language. However, Russell didn't limit himself to academic debates or abstract ideas. He believed philosophy should address the pressing issues of human existence. His writings explored religion, morality, happiness, and war, often sparking fierce public debate. As mentioned earlier, his critiques of organized religion, his pacifism during World War I, and his later activism against nuclear weapons exemplify his commitment to intellectual honesty and social responsibility, no matter the cost. Russell's activism didn't come without consequences. He was dismissed from his academic position at Trinity College for his anti-war stance and imprisoned during World War I for his outspoken pacifism. Despite these challenges, he remained steadfast, continuing to write and speak out on topics that mattered to him. In 1950, Russell was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, not for fiction, but for his essays and books that brought philosophical ideas into the public sphere. The Nobel Committee praised him for his varied and significant writings in which he champions humanitarian ideals and freedom of thought. Before diving into Bertrand Russell's philosophy, it's important to understand why his ideas in general were considered dangerous. Russell had a rare combination of intellectual brilliance and moral courage, and he used both to challenge some of the most powerful and deeply ingrained systems of his time: religion, politics, and even the foundations of human society. What made his ideas dangerous wasn't violence or rebellion in a physical sense. It was their power to unsettle the status quo. Russell questioned the beliefs and systems that gave people comfort and institutions their authority. Whether it was his critique of organized religion, his staunch pacifism during wartime, or his sharp critiques of capitalism, Russell's willingness to publicly oppose dominant ideologies made him a lightning rod for controversy. His ideas were especially threatening to those in power because they were grounded in rigorous logic and moral clarity. They didn't rely on emotion or rhetoric, but on reasoned argument, making them harder to dismiss and more difficult to refute. This intellectual force is what made him so polarizing. For some, he was a liberator of the mind. For others, he was a dangerous agitator who undermined the foundations of morality and order. With this in mind, let's move on to his critique of religion. Bertrand Russell's critique of religion remains one of the most provocative aspects of his philosophy. In works like Why I Am Not a Christian, he argued that religion was not only intellectually indefensible, but also morally harmful. For Russell, the belief in God and adherence to organized religion stifled free inquiry, encouraged fear over reason, and justified immense suffering throughout history. Russell was particularly critical of how religious institutions exerted control over individuals. He believed that doctrines rooted in dogma, rather than evidence, manipulated people through guilt, fear of eternal punishment, and promises of salvation. To Russell, this undermined human progress and personal freedom. He famously said, "Religion is based primarily and mainly upon fear. It is partly the terror of the unknown, and partly the wish to feel that you have a kind of elder brother who will stand by you in all your troubles." This statement encapsulates his view that religion appeals to human insecurities rather than fostering independent thought. His critiques extended beyond theological arguments. Russell linked religion to historical atrocities, wars, persecutions, and the suppression of scientific advancement. For instance, he often pointed to the Church's resistance to thinkers like Galileo as evidence of religion's antagonism toward progress. In Russell's view, a world free from religious dogma would be more open to scientific inquiry and ethical reasoning based on human needs rather than divine commands. However, Russell's views on religion were not entirely dismissive. While he was critical of its role in historical atrocities, such as wars and persecutions, and its resistance to scientific advancements, he also acknowledged some of its positive social functions. He recognized that religion, particularly in earlier societies, provided a framework for moral behavior and a sense of purpose in an otherwise chaotic and uncertain world. For Russell, the problem was not the existence of religion itself, but its tendency to enforce dogmatic beliefs and stifle reasoned inquiry. Another of Bertrand Russell's ideas was his unwavering commitment to pacifism and his outspoken opposition to militarism, especially during times of widespread nationalism and war. His stance was not only intellectually grounded but deeply personal, and it came at a significant cost to his reputation, career, and even his freedom. Russell's pacifism was rooted in his broader philosophy of rational ethics and humanism. He argued that war was not only a moral failing, but also an irrational and unnecessary waste of human life. During World War I, Russell became one of Britain's most prominent anti-war voices, publicly criticising the war as a product of political ambition and economic interest rather than a just or necessary cause. He believed that disputes between nations could and should be resolved through negotiation and reason, not violence. This position was deeply controversial at the time. Britain was in the midst of a war effort that demanded patriotism and sacrifice. To speak out against the war was seen as unpatriotic, even treasonous. Russell's outspoken criticism led to his dismissal from Trinity College, Cambridge, and he was later imprisoned for 6 months in 1918 for publishing anti-war writings. Far from silencing him, his imprisonment only strengthened his resolve. He used the time to write, reflect, and refine his arguments against militarism. Russell's anti-militarism didn't end with World War I. Decades later, he became a leading voice in the fight against nuclear weapons during the Cold War. As the world's superpowers stockpiled weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. Russell co-authored the Russell-Einstein Manifesto in 1955, a powerful plea for nuclear disarmament signed by some of the greatest scientific minds of the time. This manifesto urged humanity to put aside nationalistic interests and confront the existential threat posed by nuclear war. Russell's pacifism was considered dangerous not because it incited violence, but because it undermined the narratives used to justify war. Governments relied on public support, fueled by nationalism and fear, to sustain military efforts. By calling these motives into question, Russell challenged the very foundations of wartime propaganda and policy. His anti-militarism also clashed with the economic and political interests tied to war. The arms industry, political leaders, and even segments of the public benefited from or supported militarism, viewing Russell's ideas as naive or even subversive. Bertrand Russell saw capitalism as a system that perpetuated inequality and exploitation, prioritizing profit over human well-being. He believed that treating workers as mere tools of production was morally unacceptable and socially destructive. For Russell, capitalism's focus on competition and greed undermined the potential for cooperation and fairness in society. Instead, he advocated for a democratic form of socialism that balanced individual freedom with collective welfare. Unlike authoritarian models, Russell's vision emphasized access to essential resources like education, healthcare, and housing, while preserving personal liberty and democracy. For him, this was about creating the conditions necessary for human flourishing. Russell's critique challenged the dominant economic systems of his time, questioning the very foundations of Western society. During the Cold War, his advocacy for socialism was particularly controversial, often dismissed as radical or idealistic. His distinction between democratic socialism and authoritarian communism was frequently overlooked, fueling opposition to his ideas. In an era of growing wealth inequality, Russell's critique of capitalism feels more relevant than ever. His call for a fairer distribution of resources and a system that prioritizes human dignity continues to challenge us to rethink the ethics of our economic structures. By blending reason with compassion, Russell's ideas remain a bold blueprint for a just society. For Bertrand Russell, the pursuit of individual freedom was one of the highest ideals of human life. He believed that a society's greatness could be measured by the degree to which it allowed individuals to think, act, and live freely, without fear of repression or undue interference from institutions like governments, religions, or economic systems. Russell's philosophy of freedom emphasized not only the absence of external constraints, but also the internal conditions necessary for self-expression and growth. He argued that true freedom required both social structures that protect individual rights and an environment that nurtures curiosity and creativity. Education played a crucial role in this vision. For Russell, education was not about obedience or rote memorization, but about fostering independent thought and critical reasoning. He believed that a free society needed individuals capable of questioning authority and challenging established norms. Importantly, Russell didn't advocate for freedom without responsibility. He recognized that individual liberty must coexist with respect for others and a commitment to the greater good. His balanced approach reminds us that freedom isn't just about breaking free from constraints. It's about building a society where each person can thrive as a unique and valued individual. One of Bertrand Russell's most practical contributions to philosophy is his exploration of human nature and the pursuit of happiness. As mentioned earlier, Russell believed that philosophy should address the real problems of human existence, and in his book, The Conquest of Happiness, he tackled the universal question: what makes life worth living? For Russell, happiness was not an elusive or mysterious state, but something people could actively cultivate through thoughtful reflection and intentional action. However, he argued that modern society often creates conditions that undermine happiness by amplifying psychological and social pressures. Fear and anxiety, deeply rooted in human nature, are intensified by societal structures that emphasize competition, insecurity, and rigid expectations. These fears, whether of failure, judgment, or the future, paralyze individuals and rob them of the freedom to explore life fully. Envy, another pervasive source of unhappiness, is fueled by a culture of constant comparison, where success and self-worth are measured against the achievements or possessions of others. For Russell, this mindset blinds people to their own unique strengths and fosters dissatisfaction and resentment rather than gratitude and contentment. Boredom and restlessness, which Russell saw as deeply interconnected, also act as significant barriers to happiness. He argued that boredom, while an essential part of human existence and even a catalyst for creativity and self-discovery, is often treated as something to be feared. Modern society, with its emphasis on constant stimulation and productivity, encourages people to avoid boredom at all costs, leading many to seek superficial distractions, whether in mindless entertainment, material consumption, or excessive socializing, that fail to provide lasting fulfillment. This restless search for diversion often leaves individuals feeling more unfulfilled, as it distracts them from addressing deeper needs for purpose and inner peace. Russell criticized societal norms that glorify relentless work, arguing that excessive labor diminishes creativity and joy while reinforcing these harmful patterns. To counter these obstacles, Russell advocated for a life of balance and intentional living. He emphasized the importance of meaningful work that aligns with one's passions, intellectual curiosity that nurtures personal growth, and strong relationships that provide emotional support. Cultivating a mindset of curiosity, gratitude, and simplicity, he believed, could help individuals break free from the traps of fear, envy, and superficiality. At the heart of his philosophy of happiness is a balanced view of human nature, one that acknowledges our capacity for fear and restlessness, but also celebrates our potential for reason, compassion, and creativity. In today's fast-paced, hyper-connected world, where many of the challenges Russell identified have only intensified, his insights remain strikingly relevant. His call to embrace simplicity, think critically, and focus on meaningful pursuits reminds us that happiness is not found in external validation, but in cultivating inner peace and purpose. But what we've covered here today is only the beginning. Russell's philosophy is so vast that this video has barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, from his groundbreaking work in logic and epistemology to his progressive ideas on education and relationships, and of course delving deeper into his thought-provoking critiques of capitalism, religion, and his vision of socialism. Bertrand Russell's ideas continue to resonate because they address fundamental issues of human existence. Questions about morality, freedom, progress, and the role of reason in society. While rooted in the challenges of his own time, his insights remain remarkably relevant in today's world, where many of the struggles he critiqued persist, albeit in different forms. Russell's philosophy reminds us of the power of questioning. Whether critiquing organized religion, opposing militarism, challenging economic inequality, or advocating for individual freedom, he demonstrated that intellectual courage could challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. If you found value in this video, please share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button. Thank you for watching.
To say. The moral thing I should wish to say to them is very simple. I should say, love is wise, hatred is foolish. In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things that we don't like. We can only live together in that way. But if we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance, which is absolutely vital to the continuation of human life on this planet.